very pleased today to have James Lanthier, the CEO of Mindset Pharma, ticker is MSET on the CSE, as our guest today as part of our Echelon CEO Q&A series, where we do a deep dive into some of our favorite companies. So hi, James. Welcome.
Hi, Stefan. Thanks so much for having me on.
All right, well, let's get started. So tell us a bit about Mindset Pharma and what makes it unique as a company.
Yeah, so Mindset is a biotech company that has been exclusively focused since the company was founded about 3.5 years ago on developing novel, optimized medications that really leverage the potential of this really fascinating class of drugs, of psychedelic drugs, which were really a class of drugs that were ignored by pharma for decades. And what we're trying to do is to really apply the tools of the trade of kind of biotechnology to this class of drugs to try to create some medicines to treat people with some really hard to treat neuropsychiatric indications like depression and post-traumatic stress and so on that really haven't responded very well to the current set of treatments.
That's great. And, you guys, I know you've only been around for a couple of years, but you've developed a number of different, what you call families of drugs. Do you want to sort of quickly go over them and sort of explain to people the key families and how you're thinking about their development?
Yeah, sure. So our really mindset strategy was to we felt like there was this opportunity to create a really valuable drug discovery business that would really just be focused on discovery and in this class of drugs, because again, it was really kind of the undiscovered continent of drugs for for so long. And so our first priority was to really try to establish for ourselves a really strong intellectual property position. And so we started really by taking up an enormous amount of the white space around these drug structures, applying a whole range of different drug design strategies to these backbones. And then what we did after that was we really followed kind of a classic drug screening program to try to find some ways in which what we'd created could be different and hopefully better than the original drugs. So drugs like psilocybin or like DMT. And what we found is really a really wide range of different ways in which our drugs offer some potential superiorities over the original drugs. And so some of the factors that we're trying to improve on are things like duration. So psilocybin, there's a huge amount of data with psilocybin now to show that it can really help people who suffer from depression. But one of the drawbacks to psilocybin is its duration. So the psilocybin trip, or at least the after effects, lasts for about 6 to 8 hours. That's an enormous amount of time to have to spend in clinic, and it takes up a lot of resources. So that's been one of the factors that we're trying to solve for, and as well safety. So broadly speaking, psychedelic drugs are pretty safe, and this is why they're moving through the approval process, and they're generally speaking not addictive. But if you're talking about treating people who've suffered from chronic mental illness for decades, these are compromised patient groups. It's really important that if you're dosing these patients with a medication, that it be as safe as possible. And so those are two of the factors that we've really tried to look for and look for signs of improvement on. And so Mindset, we're constantly expanding our drug pipeline. And today we have actually 8 different families. Our most advanced families are really kind of the first 5 families, essentially. So what we call family 1 are really that's our most advanced family. Our current lead candidate comes out of that family, MSP-1014. That's really, we liken it to kind of a second generation psilocybin. It's different enough than psilocybin that it enjoys really strong intellectual property rights, but it's close enough to psilocybin that we're able to really piggyback off of psilocybins, all the data that's been built up in clinical trials with psilocybin. So we've gotten approval from the health regulator in the UK to essentially take that drug right into phase 2 trials next year. And that with that drug, we do see a stronger effect size than psilocybin and some real signs of safety improvement. We're the only biotech company in the psychedelic space that's partnered with a big pharma on on a number of our new drug families. So we're partnered with the development arm of a company called Otsuka Pharmaceuticals, which is a top 10 psychiatric drug company. And the families that we're partnered with Otsuka on are what we call family 2 and families 4 and 5. So family 2, really, we kind of liken it to third generation psilocybin. So family 2, we're really addressing the duration issue. So these are drugs that are similar enough structurally to psilocybin, but have a much stronger effect size than psilocybin, at least preclinically, levels approaching kind of LSD levels, but have a significantly shorter duration. So we're really excited about that family, and as is Otsuka, because it offers a potential solution to that duration issue that I mentioned. We're also partnered with Otsuka on families 4 and 5. And those are new, essentially, analogs or new versions, if you will, of drugs called DMT and 5-MeO-DMT. Now, 5-MeO-DMT is kind of known as probably the strongest psychedelic that scientists have ever found. It induces this really profound psychedelic trip, and it's over really quickly, 15 to 30 minutes, and then you're back, in the same way that you were before you took the drug. So the pharmaceutical space is quite excited about this drug, and again, Mindset has developed some analogs of 5-MeO. Issue with 5-MeO is that it has there's more safety issues with it than there are with psilocybin, and that's pretty well documented in the literature. And what we've really been trying to solve for with our drug candidates there is the safety issues, and we see some really promising signs of improvement, safety improvement. What we call family 3, these are really, although they're based on psilocybin, they're really a totally different class of drugs, very different than every other Mindset family. But we think it has potential, a lot of potential, this family, because here you're talking about drugs that have a much lower effect size, so they're not going to induce a psychedelic experience, but they seem to affect some of the same key serotonin receptors. And when we think about, some of the neuroprotective effects of psychedelic drugs, there are whole patient groups, where you wouldn't want those patient groups to have a psychedelic experience. But if you were able to give them a drug that delivered some of the pro-cognitive benefits of a psychedelic drug, we're talking, groups like children who suffer from ADHD or the elderly with early dementia. There are some patient groups here that a drug like that could work really well for. We're also constantly kind of running the innovation engine at Mindset, and so we've now expanded into families 6, 7, and 8. Those are much earlier. But we've got some really promising, candidates coming out of those first 5 families that were, both with the Otsuka and outside of the collaboration that we're, moving forward, hopefully to clinical study.
That's great. And so you mentioned the Otsuka deal. So I'd like to ask you a little bit more about it. It's a very unique deal, and I think it's one that wasn't necessarily properly appreciated by the market when it was announced earlier this year. I'd say in the context of a generalized, very poor market for biotechs in general, and I would say maybe the psychedelic companies in particular. Do you want to talk a bit more in detail about what the deal is about, and what can investors expect from the deal over the next couple of years?
Yeah, sure. This deal was something we were really and continue to be really excited about. It's a huge differentiator and point of validation for Mindset, but most importantly, I think it really gives us, a huge leg up in strategically in getting a drug, one or more drugs to patients, and it also really insulates us from, some of the turbulence in the public markets. So essentially, what we did with the partnership with Otsuka is centered on some of those short-acting drug families, which I mentioned, so family 2 and families 4 and 5. And Otsuka paid Mindset a very significant to us upfront payment of $5 million, and has been funding the development of those families to finish off our preclinical work, which really means to figure out which drugs are going to be our lead candidates that we'll take into clinical trials, and then to engage with regulators, file a clinical trial application, and then fund all the way through to the end of phase 1. All that funding, you couldn't ask for a better partner for Mindset's equity. All that funding is non-dilutive, it's not capped in any way, and in return for that funding plus the upfront payment, Otsuka owns a right of first refusal and right of first negotiation on those 2 families at the end of phase 1. So we haven't pre-sold our upside in any way. It means that Otsuka has been really close to the data, really understands the progress that we're making in those programs, and puts Mindset and Otsuka in an excellent position to hopefully negotiate a much larger collaboration at the end of phase 1. So it really sets us up for a potentially some major catalysts down the road once we get through the phase 1 trials with Otsuka. I also would point out that I think it puts us on a totally different strategic than anybody else in the market, in the psychedelic biotech market today. From a partnership like this, working on these, there's an enormous strategic benefit that comes from partnering with a global, big pharma that has expertise in, running clinical trials around the world, has a real focus on psychiatry, and understands how to commercialize a drug. And so that is just a huge leg up for us in advancing our business.
Yeah, I must say, one of the reasons I like the story so much is the fact that it's a very unique deal. You rarely see these type of big pharma partnerships where they pay up front for to help develop the drug, while still leaving you with the majority of the upside if things turn out well. So it's a very unique deal, and with for you an excellent partner in the psychiatry space as well. So I guess the next question is, how's the collaboration going so far? You've been at it for a couple of quarters now, and there's been some positive sort of news out of the company. How's the collaboration going? It's always easier to talk about, or before you get operating. So
yeah, I think it to be honest, I really don't think it could be going any better. And I think that the best indication of that is if you look at what we announced just a few weeks ago, that we'd selected a lead from family 2, MSP 2020, and a backup, which we call MSP 2003, to take into IND enabling studies. So for the IND enabling studies is just a fancy term for the prescriptive safety studies that you need to do if you want to apply to run a clinical trial. But as everybody knows, you don't have to be an expert to know, developing a drug gets ever more expensive as you go along the process, and then and even more expensive once you get to clinical trials. So given that these are expenses Otsuka is funding, it's a major endorsement of the direction that the program is has been headed in, and we work really collaboratively with Otsuka. We're tremendous amount of information sharing and exchange of ideas and input. So I think that's a great. We were really excited to announce that lead selection, because it's a really great Yeah, a really great, essentially tacit endorsement by Otsuka, and speaks to, how well the program has been running.
Right. And maybe taking a step back and just talking about the larger industry, what's your sort of view on the current state of play in the psychedelics space? And how do you think it's going to evolve over the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think like a lot of spaces in the public markets, there's naturally there can be, rushes of enthusiasm, and then some a little bit of pullback. I think this is a class and a category of drugs that have tremendous momentum behind them. And by momentum, I don't mean, Netflix shows and articles about celebrities going on ayahuasca retreats. Yeah, those are all offshoots of what's actually happening, which is huge amounts of huge numbers of clinical trials, of investigator initiated studies, all one after the other, confirming that this is a class of drugs that is really valuable to patients, who have many of whom have not been well served by the existing treatment methods. I mean, we all know people in our personal lives or otherwise who cycle on and off of antidepressants, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And they can take, even if they do work, they can take weeks to months until you find the one that does work. And I think psychedelic therapeutics offer a much shorter pathway to because of their immediacy. And I think there's a tremendous value to that. So yeah, they're not going to cure cancer and fix all of the world's problems, but they really are an important and valuable class of drugs. It's unfortunate it took us this long in the West to figure that out, but we're now kind of well on the way to figuring it out. So to me, the public market valuation stuff that goes up and down doesn't really matter, because what we're doing is moving our novel drug candidates forward, with the help of a very large strategic to get them to patients. And we've got tremendous momentum in our programs. And if you're on kind of the ground floor as we are, it's not like the excitement or in the scientific medical community has died down or pulled back in any way. It's completely decoupled from the public markets. At the pharma and scientific level, it's all moving forward, and it's not slowing down.
Well, that's a good segue to my next question, which is, it has been a bit of a roller coaster ride in terms of investor sentiment over the last couple of years. What do you think is most widely misunderstood about the psychedelics industry?
Well, I think that the big misunderstanding in the Canadian public markets from the beginning was that was really conflating cannabis with psychedelics, and thinking that this was a market that would, like cannabis did, go recreational and very quickly, and that would be kind of the pathway to value creation. And I don't have a crystal ball. There is certainly a wellness end to this or aspect to this, and there's lots of folks who will advocate for that. I do think that's quite a ways out, and I think that what not everybody understood is that there's a much more immediate medical application of these drugs, and that's been our focus from the very beginning. But like any medical subsector, you got to follow the regulatory pathway, and that does take a while. It doesn't mean that there isn't value creation. There's real value creation as you go along the way and you hit milestones. But it's not like cannabis. It's not at least in the near term going to be a recreational space. Ultimately, I think it'll be a much more valuable space, but it's one that you get to by hitting milestones that all lead towards the ultimate goal of getting drugs to patients.
Right. And you made some allusions to your, unique IP position already. But recently, last month, you signed a deal with, your larger cap peer, Cybin. What was the genesis of that deal, and how does it benefit Mindset and its shareholders?
Yeah, so it all goes back to our strategy, which is let's focus on what the scientific team is really good at, which is early stage, drug discovery and development. Medicinal chemistry, behavioral pharmacology. Let's not try to be something we're not, which is a company that can take a drug, all the way to patients. Our view was if we're early, carving out IP for our IP and IP kind of position for ourselves, and we do the work that we know we need to do, there's going to be lots of groups who are interested in partnering with us. And that's really exactly what the Cybin licensing deal is an example of. Essentially, we were one of the first groups to start filing IP in the space. We identified, a portion of some of our IP that we weren't working on and that we thought, might be interesting to Cybin, and that's, how that, partnership licensing agreement really, came to be. And to us, it's a win-win. Cybin has the freedom to work on those drugs if it's if they want to. They paid Mindset, something right from the get-go. So Mindset benefits either way, and if they end up developing them, then fantastic. There's more to be gained from from the Mindset side. But either way, it wasn't a group of compounds that we had worked on or were planning to work on. So I think it's a it's a real win, and it also really speaks to our early strategy of IP and getting our arms around as much of that space as we possibly could.
Yeah. It's great. I'm going to sort of segue into sort of the first generation psychedelic, second generation, third generation, and maybe help people understand, first of all, what that means, first generation, second generation, and particularly the importance of IP, of, having patents. And maybe I could just do a little explanation. Obviously, some of the natural products are not patentable. Whereas if you develop a new chemical entity that is similar and analog to that, it is patentable. Maybe explain that in more detail in terms of what you guys have managed to patent and are in the process of getting more IP around, and how that's important for creating value for shareholders.
Absolutely. So let's take magic mushrooms and psilocybin and kind of go from there. So if you're watching this, you've probably heard of magic mushrooms. Naturally occurring mushrooms that have a certain compound in them, psilocybin, which induces a psychedelic experience. So let's start with the mushrooms themselves. So they're a natural product. The psilocybin content in a mushroom can vary wildly. That really doesn't fit within a health regulator's framework, because there's really no effective way to understand how much you're dosing a patient by taking a mushroom. So when you hear about psilocybin and in connection to clinical trials, what they're talking about is typically a synthetic psilocybin by itself that's typically been formulated with some other ingredients so that you can take it orally or one of a number of different ways. Psilocybin, the chemical psilocybin, we would call a first generation psychedelic drug. So psilocybin was first synthesized in the West in kind of the middle part of the 20th century. Which means it's been essentially been off patent forever. It was actually marketed by Sandoz, the large pharmaceutical company, back in the 1950s and 60s, before it got scheduled and basically put out of bounds for medical researchers until until really very recently. So that's a first generation drug. A lot of the groups that came to sprang up in the medical psychedelic space, initially really were focused on psilocybin. Psilocybin already had been in clinical trials for some time. sponsored by one company, one well-known company, Compass, that's been focused on psilocybin, as well as a few other, not-for-profit groups. All drug spaces eventually go generic, but big pharma really doesn't start with a generic drug. They want to start with a new drug and by new, that is novel at the active pharmaceutical ingredient layer. So you really can't patent psilocybin. You could patent a formulation of psilocybin, but there's really nothing to prevent someone else from coming along with their own formulation of psilocybin and competing against you the next day. So it's, although psilocybin is very advanced in the clinical trial process, there's no pharma company that's partnered on psilocybin because they can't get the strong IP rights that they need in order to really justify their investment in it. So the original founding view of Mindset, and it's still our view today, was that pharma would look at first generation drugs as really a great proof of concept for what was possible with psychedelic therapeutics, but that they would naturally, focus on new versions of these drugs, optimized versions of these drugs that were structurally different at the active pharmaceutical ingredient layer, so that they could enjoy, strong intellectual property rights. So what we've done is make a whole range of different changes to that psilocybin compound in order to create drugs that are both novel, and that address, as I mentioned, some of those shortcomings in terms of improved safety and shortened duration, and those are what we call second or third generation psychedelic drugs. That's been our whole focus from the beginning.
Great. And maybe just to ask sort of one last question about where the company's heading. What are the key value creating milestones that investors should be expecting in the next year or two from the company?
So the end goal of Mindset is to get drugs to patients, full stop. And as we mentioned, we're going to focus on what we're really good at, which is the early stage discovery, and then ultimately partner with groups that can help us advance them further through clinical trials and to patients. And we're really excited about next year because we will have, we believe, at least one drug in human trials. In the early part of next year, we should have, we've gotten some clearance from the UK regulator, their equivalent of the FDA, to be able to take MSP-1014, which comes out of our family one, and to essentially take it right into treating patients, which is a major difference, or a huge leap forward. They're essentially allowing us to go right to phase 2. And then we'll hopefully be, moving through right now the IND enabling studies on family 2, and then filing in an IND and getting that drug hopefully into clinical trials by the end of next year. So ideally, by the end of next year, we'll have had 2 drugs in human trials.
Quite a bit of progress for a small biotech based in Toronto. Do you think there's anything broadly in the industry that people should be looking to that may be a more general catalyst for the psychedelic space?
I think next year we'll have FDA approval on the use of MDMA to treat post-traumatic stress. And I think by 2024, the expectation is that MDMA will be, available through psychiatrists in the USA, and that'll be a huge watershed moment where we're no longer talking about clinical trials or hypotheticals, where you actually have psychedelic medicine really being deployed with patients. So that'll be a major catalyst, I think.
All right, great. So we're going to finish up with a final question on sort of ESG. I mean, as a pharmaceutical company, clearly, who's trying to help people with mental health disorders, already, I guess your corporate focus is one that's clearly trying to help the people. But we just wanted to ask you at a maybe higher level. how is corporate governance managed across the company and its operations? And are issues around ESG discussed at the board level with the company?
I mean, they're balanced. That discussion is balanced against the fact that the company already has, I think, a fairly a mission that is aimed squarely at improving the public good. We get messages all the time from folks looking to see if they're quite heartbreaking to see if they can get access to our clinical trials, and I have to explain that we're not in clinical trials yet, but we're trying to get there as fast as we can. And we are a small company. We've tried to be really judicious and selective with how we use shareholder capital to advance the business. But yeah, absolutely. These we do have those discussions, and we're mindful of keeping good ESG practices embedded as part of the company.
Well, that's okay. That's a good way to finish. Thank you so much for your time today, and we wish you success in your endeavors.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Really appreciate it.